Okay, hello, good morning. Let's start. A little bit calmer this time than last time. The reading for today was the first 6 paragraphs of Frege's On Sense and Reference. And today all I want to do is work through what goes on in those first 6 paragraphs. And on Monday, we'll look at the next couple of pages, the whole of those first 6 paragraphs, plus the next few pages of Frege's On Sense and Reference. Have you had a chance to look at the first 6 paragraphs yet? Did you find it easy or hard? Easy? Easy-ish? Put up your hands if it's easy-ish. If it's hardish? Well, okay. Maybe we really can speed up today. I was just going to say, is Melissa here? Okay, so I should have said yes on Wednesday, only I was so rattled by all the chaos that I forgot that sections in the class are compulsory. So to take the class, you have to find a section time that works for you and enroll in it with Melissa. And we'll stop a little bit early today, so Melissa can get everybody sorted into times. Okay. Okay. So the way we left it last time was that if we can understand something about how names get hooked up to objects, then we'll be on our way to understanding something about how there can be such a thing as language, how there can be such a thing as getting it right or wrong in sentences involving the use of names. So what we need to understand is how it is that the elements of a sentence can refer to the things around us, how it is that words can refer to things. I'm sorry about you guys having to sit. I don't think this is going to be a long-term problem, but we'll see how it goes. Okay. So I want to start out. If you've looked at the Frege, you'll see that he talks quite a bit about informative and uninformative identities. Right? So that's the basic contrast we need to understand. And then the next thing is, how does he explain that distinction? So I just want to start out with this distinction between informative and uninformative identities. This can seem like an almost trivial technical thing, but so much turns on it, and so many thousands of pages have been spent in this distinction, and indeed are spent in this distinction today, that is really important to have a secure grasp of what the basic idea is. So Frege starts out with a priori and analytic. A priori? What's a priori, class? Yes?
Necessary truth statement.
A priori is necessarily true. Anyone else?
It can be known without experience.
It can be known without experience. Anyone else? Okay, very good. These are different distinctions. The necessary one is an important notion, but it's not quite the same as a priori. The key thing about a priori is this idea: it can be known to be true independently of experience. Yep. So you just know it by reason. So something like that is the picture. It's a little bit. It's not quite trivial to put this straightforwardly, because take a remark like orange is in between red and yellow. Is that a priori? Can you know that to be true just by thinking about it? No? Why not? Did you have to look at a whole bunch of red things and orange things and yellow things? Exactly, you have to know what orange means. The idea is something a little bit subtle. It's that often you need experience to know what the terms mean, but once you've loaded up enough experience to give you knowledge of what the terms mean, you don't need experience to do any further work to tell you that orange is in between red and yellow. Something like that? Yep. Whereas you get green by mixing blue and yellow. I guess that's something you have to just do it to find out. Yep. Okay, you didn't know that, a priori. So examples of the a priori? Yes?
All bachelors are unmarried.
All bachelors are unmarried. Yeah, I guess that's a priori. Yeah, you didn't need to do I mean, some scientists who said we've done an extensive survey and we found that bachelors really, it's incredible. The correlation between being bachelor and being unmarried is very, very high. Right? You didn't need to run an experiment to do that. You didn't need to run a survey. Anything else?
Everything is identical to itself.
Everything is identical to itself. Yeah, presumably that's a priori. Okay, analytic, a proposition's true in virtue of its meaning. So bachelors are unmarried, might count there too. Yeah. There are two related ideas here. If you know what the proposition means, then you know that it's true. Yeah. Or to put it another way, a related idea, what it takes, what makes the thing true is the fact that the signs mean what they do. It's not the way the world is that makes it true, it's the fact that the signs mean what they do. Any other examples? Analytic? No? What about, there's a truck outside. Analytic or not analytic? Hello? Am I on the air? Sorry? Say again?
It's analytic because you can hear the engine.
It's analytic because you can hear the engine. Okay, I'm not explaining this very clearly. Okay, if you understood what I said when I said there's a truck outside, is that all it takes for you to know that the thing is true? Just understanding what I said. How did you know it was true? You could hear the racket, right? You had to hear the racket to know there was a truck outside. Am I going too fast here? Is it? Okay, yes?
Oh, I was just going to say, it's not analytic because you don't know if the proposition is true in virtue of the meaning of the proposition. You know it's true because of observation.
That's right. You know it's true because of observation. That's the idea. You didn't know it was true just by hearing the words and knowing what they meant. Yes? Yeah. Nothing is both red and green all over. Analytic? Analytic or not analytic? Put up your hand if you think it's analytic. And if you think it's not analytic? Okay. Why would it not be analytic? If to say it's not analytic is to say there's something more than the meanings of the words that makes it true. Yeah? So the thing could mean just what it does, and yet you could find something red and green all over. Red all over and green all over. Is that okay? That could happen? I know it's a bit early for this kind of thing. Okay, there's room for discussion of all these examples, but in the face of it, that's something analytic. Yeah? Just if you get what the words mean, you're going to say, oh yeah, nothing could be both red all over and green all over. Yep, yep. A priori but not analytic. That's a hard one. A priori but not analytic. Otherwise there shouldn't be a distinction. Well, first of all, the two things are explained differently, right? This one's explained in terms of knowledge, independent of experience. Yep. This one has to do with meaning. Yeah? Okay. Now, the examples you might give here are all kind of controversial, but suppose you take something like the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. Yeah? Is that a priori? Can you know that just by reasoning about it? That's how you're taught it in high school, right? Just think about this. Of course they all add up to 180 degrees. Yeah? But is that true in virtue of meaning? Isn't there a fact about the structure of space-time? That's how a triangle is defined. Suppose I define a triangle as a plane figure bounded by three sides. I didn't define it in terms of angles adding up to 180 degrees. Yeah? Okay. This kind of example is highly controversial, right? What you're thinking there is perfectly sensible, if you see what I mean. It's hard to find cases that are clearly a priori, but not analytic, but clearly not analytic, yeah? But this is what a case would look like, if you see what I mean, if you buy my reading this. Melissa, do you have any examples?
I was going to use the controversial one too, like
I exist, that's a good one. Yeah, that's better actually. I exist. I mean, yeah, what about that? Do you need to look and see? My God, here I am. You see what I mean? So sometimes I look round and I'm not there. Sometimes I look round and I am there. And now I look round and by God, I'm here, right? I do exist. That's not the way it works, right? You know you exist just by thinking about it. But does the meaning of the signs I exist guarantee that you exist? It seems to me like a fact about the world that you exist. Yeah. So that's just to try and give a sense of what the distinction comes to. Okay. Necessary is a different idea again, and we'll spend quite a while on necessary, right? So I know this is a little bit technical, but so here's Frege. A is identical to A, holds a priori, and according to Kant is to be labelled analytic. So what he means there, if you get any sentence, you get the same name twice, that's a priori and analytic. If I say Melissa is Melissa, that's a priori? Of course it is, yeah? You didn't have, I didn't have to check and see. If I can use you as an example, I didn't have to check and see. If you know the meaning of the identity sign and you know understand the names, Melissa and Melissa, then it's got to be true, right? Who else would Melissa be but Melissa? Yes? Yeah?
What if it's two different Melissas?
What if it was two different Melissas? Okay, then I guess the signs are two different meanings. Yeah, because it'd be standing for two different things. Yeah? Yep.
What if the same person, like, what if it refers to the same person, they're actually two identities, for instance, and say, Clark is Superman.
Clark is Superman, very good. That, I guess, is not a priori, right? That is a big surprise to Lois, for example. Yeah? Right. So is that a priori? I guess not. I'll actually confirm your point in just a second, right? But what about Clark is Clark?
Yeah.
If Lois says resignedly, Clark is Clark, right? Then, yeah, I mean, it's funny, you can say, Lois can say, well, Clark is Clark, but on the other hand, Superman is Superman, right? That seems to, sorry?
But isn't Clark Superman?
Yes, I'm not denying that. All I mean is, it says something different to say Clark is Clark than it is to say Clark is Superman. Yeah? If Lois says resignedly, Clark is Clark, yeah, that's different. Yeah. So the thing Clark is a priori and analytic. Yeah? Whereas statements of the form A is B, where these are two different names, often contain very valuable extensions of our knowledge and cannot always be established a priori. So Clark is Superman is a fine example. Okay, this is really the basis of what goes on in Frege, so it's good to get this rock solid what this distinction is. Okay, we happy with a priori and analytic? Everything I'm saying here is very, very simple, so if it doesn't seem very, very simple, then stop me and pause me, because it's the explanation then that's going wrong. Okay, so Frege gives us examples. Uninformative identities, the morning star is the morning star, the evening star is the evening star. Yeah. These are not informative, these are a priori and analytic. Yeah. An informative identity, he says, the morning star is the evening star. Right, when you find out there is one and the same planet you're seeing in the morning as you're seeing in the evening, that was a significant astronomical discovery. Yeah? Or look at this. See this object seen from the rings of Saturn and our own dear Earth seen from the moon. is this identical to this? You can't tell, can you? I mean, I don't mean to be kind of establishing my superiority here, but you can't tell just by looking at it, right? If it's the same thing, yeah? Now you can take it from me, that is the same thing. That is our own dear Earth seen from Saturn. Yeah? But that's informative. Yeah, I showed you the same thing 2 times, but it was not a priori to be told it was the same thing. Yeah? The way I was showing it to you here and the way I was showing it to you here are very, very different. All right? That's all right? So that's an identity, all right? It's the same thing, but it's a priori. It's not a priori, sorry, and it's not analytic. Yep?
Don't you find out that they are the same thing by reasoning alone?
By reasoning alone?
By doing the calculation?
Okay, do it. Let's see.
I'm not an astronomer, but I mean, that's how astronomers find out that this is a picture of our planet, right? By doing just calculations.
I agree that calculations are involved, but look, I don't know a whole lot about astronomy, but telescopes, I promise you, are also involved. You see what I mean? You can't do that. You can't do it without a telescope, or at any rate, at the very least, looking at the sky. You see what I mean? You've got to have that. So I agree calculations are involved, and that's an important remark, yeah? But the observations are also essential, yeah? Whereas if I just tell you, ask you, is this thing this thing? You don't need any observation, you don't need any calculation. Yeah, that's just the law of identity. Yep? Okay. Okay, let's take a more mundane example. Consider this humble shed. Is this shed the same thing as that thing? Same or different? Put out your hand if you think it's the same. If you think it's different. Yes? Same? Different? Okay, I'm happy to tell you it is the same shed. In fact, it's my shed. But the point is, it's hard to tell, right? You can't be sure. You certainly don't know that a priori. You guys are making an educated guess when you say that. Yeah, you're getting different views of the same thing. Yeah, so it's informative to be told it's the same thing. Or moving on, here is Sir Percy Blakeney, the effete English aristocrat. And on the other hand, the Scarlet Pimpernel, you doubtless recall, was the daring rascal who saved so many French aristocrats from the guillotine during the French Revolution. So, was Sir Percy Blakeney the Scarlet Pimpernel? Well, that was an a posteriori discovery. That rocked English society, that this negligent fop could actually be the daredevil that saved so many aristocrats from the blade of the French. Yep. Okay, so is that informative or uninformative? Informative, very good. Right. Now we're cooking. Right. What about Clark Kent and Superman? Informative. Okay, Clark Kent is Clark Kent? Uninformative. Superman is Superman? Okay, and just one last example, well, 2 last examples, but this is probably the most famous informative identity of recent years. Know this, Luke Skywalker, I am your father. Now, it's important to this that you be very sensitive to the distinction between informative and uninformative identities. I mean, if George, what's his name, George Lucas, that's right. If George Lucas had been insensitive to the distinction between informative and uninformative identities, you could have had the whole movie building up to a reveal like, know this, Luke Skywalker, I am myself. Or, know this, Luke Skywalker, your father is your father. And you see what I mean? It doesn't work, right? So, this thing about informative and uninformative identities is not just a kind of idle academic speculation. It really matters for the real world. Okay, and here's Frege. The discovery that the rising sun is not new every morning, but always the same, was one of the most fertile astronomical discoveries. I once saw a cartoon showing two cavemen watching the setting sun, and one of them was saying to the other, "Look at that, there's a big pile of them over there." They go down every night, right? So there must be a whole stack of them down there. And there must have been a time when that was a live possibility, right? It's not, you've got to discover that the rising sun is not new every morning. So that's an informative identity. That's really a basic informative identity about understanding what kind of world we're in, that the rising sun is the same thing every morning. I had a friend who used to play a lot of pinball, and actually I have no idea. Pinball? Yeah, you've heard of it? Yeah. Okay, I don't know. I'm just checking. Okay, pinball, you know the thing, you get a ball and you kind of fire it around and you flip the thing with flippers. And when you put your money in, you get 5 balls, right? Yes? Ah. Or is it the same ball 5 times? My friend was well into middle life when he suddenly realized that it was the same ball he was getting each time. He had always thought he got 5 balls, right? You see what I mean? So there can be, yeah. So is that thing about it being that ball is the same ball I had a minute ago, informative or uninformative? Very good. Okay. So we comfortable with informative versus uninformative identities? Okay. The question Frege raises is, there's something puzzling about this. How can there be there's contrast between informative and uninformative identities? The way I set things up last time, the meaning of a name is the object it stands for. The object it stands for is the contribution that the name makes to the sentence it contains. Right? That's how a name has meaning, by standing for an object. So if 2 names stand for the same object, they should have the same meaning. Frege says that's not quite right. He says you need 3 parts here. There's the name, Sir Percy Blakeney, that combination of words, what he calls the sense of the sign, and the thing that the sign stands for, Sir Percy himself, or the rising sun, or whatever it is. Now, he's arguing against a picture in which there's just the sign and the object, and that's all there is to say. And here's his argument. I just want to work through this because it's not quite straightforward to follow this in the text. If we were to regard identity, as a relation between that which the names A and B designate, it would seem that A is identical to B, could not differ from A is identical to A, provided A is B is true. So if you say I've got the name and the object, and identity is, I've got a name and an object, and let's say I've got 2 names now and 2 objects, and identity is a relation between this object and that object. That seems kind of sensible, right? If you say if you assert the identity A is B, what you're saying is this thing is identical to this thing. Yep. But then if you've got 2 different names that are both referring to the same thing, this thing is identical to this thing, well, it's the same thing down here both times. So how can there be any difference between the case in which you've got an informative identity and the case in which you've got an uninformative identity? In both cases, you've got the same object down here and an identity being asserted between them. You see what I mean? You can pause me. You can just put your hand up and say, I don't get it. That's perfectly respectable. Yeah. Well, suppose you take Clark Kent is Superman. Yep. And I've got Clark Kent is identical to Superman. So how do I interpret that? Well, I say there's the object here, namely the what does he come from? The Kryptonian? Yeah. You can see that cartoon saying So, Superman's at the doctor, and the doctor is saying to him, actually, we've now found out that in small quantities, kryptonite is actually good for you. Anyway, that's by the way. Where was I? Okay, so you've got the Kryptonian here, yeah? And if you say Clark is Clark, you're saying that Kryptonian is the same as that Kryptonian. If you say Clark is Superman, you're saying that Kryptonian is that Kryptonian. It's the same thing both times. Yeah, you're saying the same thing both times because you get the same object and you get the same relation being asserted between them. So how could there be a distinction between informative and uninformative identities? Yeah, that's Frege's point. If you just got the objects here, then it's the same object. If we were to regard equality as a relation between that which the names A and B designate, which is the planet Venus or the Kryptonian or whatever it is, it would seem that A as B could not differ from A as A, provided A as B is true. Is that perfectly plain? Completely unmistakable? Yep. Okay. A relation would thereby be expressed when you say A is B or A is A of a thing to itself, and indeed one in which each thing stands to itself but to no other thing. Right? That's just identity. You're identical to yourself but not to anything else. Yeah? Plain as day? Okay. So if you take the remarks, the morning star is the morning star and the morning star is the evening star. If you look at these two statements, there is no difference in which objects they're talking about. There are 4 references there altogether, all to the same thing, the planet Venus. So there's no difference in which objects these are talking about, and it's the same identity relation that's being used for all of them. So they must be saying the same thing. But there is this difference between them, that one is informative and the other is uninformative. So how can that be? What's going on? How can it be that these are informative? And then, well, what's your hunch? Yep. Yeah.
Oh, it's like combining
two different pieces of information. Yeah, but that must be right. But the question is, what concept of information? If I was taking it that you say which piece of information by saying which object you're talking about. Yeah, but if you think of information as a matter of which object you're talking about, then this is the same information in both these propositions. You see what I mean? So you need to spell out what you mean by information. Two perceptions. Yeah. That's good. That is very good. It can't be quite right because it's not as if you're referring to particular perceptions here. Yeah. But there's something right about that. If you think of the examples I showed you, it's that the way you're perceiving the thing is different in the two cases. Yeah, something like that. But that's not easy to spell out. Yep. 1, 2. Yep. Okay, sort it out between yourselves.
So there are 2 different senses for each sign?
There are 2 different senses. Okay, that's Frege's theory. Yeah.
Yeah, the senses lead you to the same reference.
Okay. That's exactly what Frege is saying. Yeah, that's how you explain. That's where his notion of sense comes in. Yep. Same thing. Okay, I just want to talk through. There is such a load on this in the last 150 years or something of philosophical discussion. This takes such a load. This point, I want to work through it, how Frege gets here. Frege considers another possibility. Suppose you've got the picture, or there's only the sign and the object. And you see, I'm going to work with that, and I'm going to explain this distinction. Frege says, the way I explain that distinction is by saying, well, maybe what you're saying is that the 2 signs designate the same thing. If I say Clark Kent is Clark Kent, what I'm saying is this sign designates the same thing as that sign. If I say Clark Kent is Superman, what I'm really saying is the sign Clark Kent designates the same thing as does the sign Superman. So I'm talking about those signs themselves are under discussion. A relation between them is being asserted. Okay? And he says this can't be right. And he actually gives 2 different reasons for thinking this can't be right. He says this relation of identity would hold between the names or signs only insofar as they named or designated something. It would be mediated by the connection of each of the two signs with the same designated thing. So you get the sign Clark Kent and you get the sign Superman, and what you're saying is Clark Kent designates something, Superman designates something, and it's the same thing. And he says, but that's an arbitrary fact of language. What a sign designates is a matter of linguistic convention or something. It's the same thing. It's conventional in the sense that the same sign could have designated something else. Yes? And that's just arbitrary which things are named by which signs. So you're talking about an arbitrary fact of language here. Nobody can be forbidden to use any arbitrarily producible event or object as a sign for something. I mean, if I say, let this laptop designate the sun, you can't stop me. I mean, you know, I'll do what I like. So in that case, the sentence A is identical to B doesn't refer to its subject matter anymore, only to the way the subject matter is being designated. That's to say, when you say the evening star is the morning star, that seems to be an astronomical discovery. That seems to be a fact you're discovering about the stars in the night sky. Or in this way of thinking of it, this is not actually, it's a fact about language that you're learning. And he says, Frege puts that by saying, we'd express no proper knowledge by its means. We thought we were expressing proper knowledge about the night sky, or what's in the night sky and what's in the evening sky. But we find out we're just talking about our own system of language. That's not what we thought we meant when we said the morning star is the evening star. And then the killer point he makes is that actually, when you think about it, it's not trivial to be told that Clark Kent, the sign Clark Kent, and this sign Clark Kent designate the same thing. That's not trivial either. You could have a language where every time you make successive uses of a name, they're always referring to different people. Yeah? In fact, we actually do work with something like that convention in English. The philosopher David Kaplan once talked about his aunt having, I can't remember, I think a family doctor and a psychotherapist, both called Dr. Jones, and having long conversations about what Dr. Jones said to Dr. Jones. And how did Dr. Jones take that? Or did you tell Dr. Jones what Dr. Jones said? And that has a kind of vaudeville sound to it if you do that, that kind of crosstalk. So if you go in that kind of context, it's informative to be told Dr. Jones is Dr. Jones. So Clark Kent is Clark Kent would become informative too, if you thought of it in this way. Yeah? It would be just as informative as Clark Kent is Superman. They're both just remarks about the arbitrary systems of signs that we're using. So you destroy the contrast between informative and uninformative identities. And then Frege says, the difference can arise only if the difference between the signs corresponds to a difference in the mode of presentation of that which is designated. So as you saw in those pictures I was giving, there's the way the thing is given to you by Clark Kent, there's the way the thing is given to you by Superman, and these are different. Your take on the thing when you're saying Superman, your take on the thing when you're saying Clark Kent are different. So you've got to recognize three levels. There's the name, there's the sense of the sign, and there's the reference of the sign. That's the argument. And now the puzzling thing is, what's the sense? What are we talking about when we talk about sense? Yep, yep.
Seems like it's just the sign, but it's not an arbitrary sign, something that all of these every
Yeah, well, there's a bit in what you said, there's a bit where you say it and a bit where you take it back. You say it is the sign, but it's not just the arbitrary sign. Well, what is it then? Right, the sign is arbitrary.
Well, a sign that we all agree upon is valid for representation of the object.
Yeah, but that sign is arbitrary. Any sign we have is arbitrary. You could have called this thing something different. You could have used that name for something different. Yeah? There's no non-arbitrary sign. Even if we all agree to make this arbitrary use of it, if you see what I mean, it is arbitrary that we make this use of it. You see what I mean? It's kind of like driving on the right. We do all agree on driving in the right, and it's very important that we all agree about that, but it's arbitrary. You could have done that a different way. Yeah? Yeah. What the sign means to the individual, yeah. Okay, that's important. There might be some relativity to an individual in what's informative and what's not informative, but the puzzling thing is the bit where you just said the meaning. The question is, what's that? Okay, because we're going to stop a little bit early because of Section 2, thank you, who said that? Discussion sections, thank you. I just want to finally make a remark about one comment Frege makes. He says, the regular connection between a sign, its sense, and its reference is such that to the sign there corresponds a definite sense, and to that, in turn, a definite reference. Whereas to a given object, there does not belong only a simple sign. So the sign picks out a definite sense, and that sense picks out a particular reference. But you can't, from the reference, work back to the sense or the sign. And probably the most famous example of this is the case of Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin? Okay, the miller had a beautiful daughter, and the king came to visit the miller, and the miller said, my daughter can spin straw into gold. And the king said, that's fantastic, let's see her do it. If it turns out not to be true, I'll have her executed. And the miller said, oh my God, okay. And the daughter said, what am I going to do? And the king produced some bales of hay and said, well, we'll see you in the morning. And the daughter lamented her lot. And as he reached despair, suddenly an imp appeared. And the imp said, what will you give me if I spin the straw into gold? And she gave him her necklace. And he turned the straw into gold. And the next night, the king was naturally amazed and said, that's great, look at all that gold. And he gave her a stack of bales of hay and said, do it again. And the next night she again lamented her lot, and again the imp appeared, and she gave him her scarf, and he span the straw into gold. And the king said, that's fantastic, do it again and I'll marry you, otherwise I'll have you executed. And once again the imp appeared, but at this point she had nothing to give him, so she offered her, he said to her, I tell you what, if you give me your firstborn child, I'll spin it into gold. And she said, okay, what am I going to do? You can have my firstborn child. And he span it into gold, and the king married her. And in due course there was a son born, and the imp appeared and said, that's mine, I claim the child. And she said, no, I was only kidding. And he said, no, you weren't. I want the child. And so, as you can imagine, they had a certain amount of discussion. And he said, okay, I tell you what, if you can guess my name, you can keep the child. And she said, well, is it Bill? Is it Sam? She couldn't do it. Right? Illustrating Frege's point that there is no backward path from reference to sense to sign. You can't just look at the object and work out what its name is. You can't get back from reference to sense to sign, that you can't go this way. The rest of the story is of no philosophical interest, so we'll leave it at that. Okay, yes?
What if you have 8 to 2 on the water?
We'll come on to that. Okay, we have to pack up because we have to get on to sections. I'm sorry. We will certainly spend a lot of time actually on H2O and water. Okay. Okay, so sections. Okay.